You may have seen this gun before on social media, but today we're going to take an in-depth look at its real-world origins, how it was built, how it performs, and how the airsoft clone compares to the real thing. So first, let's talk about the real gun this is based on. While information in English-speaking sources is hard to find, Steyr appears to have developed their 24-inch H-bar barrel setup early in the AUG's history. This barrel was offered in two configurations. The first was a DMR using a ZF69 6x scope mounted to an export receiver with top rail, but otherwise was a standard AUG. The second was a light machine gun configuration, using either the standard A1 or later A2 receiver fitted with an open bolt trigger pack. The LMG was also intended to be used with 42-round magazines for slightly higher capacity. On paper, this LMG variant had a lot going for it. It was all drop-in parts, so had logistical commonality with the proven and reasonably successful AUG. It offered open bolt operation and quick change barrels, both of which are important characteristics for sustained fire, and with the bullpup configuration, even a 24-inch barrel length was relatively compact. However, on any gun where the sights are fixed to the receiver rather than the barrel, different barrels can produce different points of impact. And at a more fundamental level, the magazine-fed automatic rifle concept never saw much success in the West, with belt-fed machine guns dominating NATO procurement. Ultimately, it appears that no H-bar AUG configuration saw military success. The LMG variant was only adopted by the military of Luxembourg, and the DMR variant wasn't adopted by anyone. But Steyr offered the 24-inch barrel setup on the commercial market, and since barrels are fully interchangeable across the AUG variants, a variety of configurations can be found out in the wild today. So, our build specifically replicates a light machine gun configuration on an A2 receiver using a 24-inch barrel, open bolt trigger pack, and 42-round magazines. We've also made some tweaks that aren't specific to the LMG conversion, but we'll go through those as well. First up is the barrel group. This is at its core a Hephaestus steel 20-inch barrel with a Simoon steel gas block. GHK's pot metal gas block shears very easily, so this is good insurance against accidentally breaking off the foregrip. The inner barrel and hop setup are a drop-in TNT set, which has produced better results across a high round count than other test setups. At the front of the barrel, about 5 inches of airsoft barrel extension are used to bring up the length. It turns out that GHK molded part of what would be the barrel on the real thing into the flash hider, so it's necessary to add a bit of extra length to get it correct with a different flash hider. The flash hider here is an Angel Custom one, which, despite being Angel Custom, is actually a pretty nicely made steel replica of the correct H-bar flash hider. The bipod itself, however, is not correct to the originals. This is a Ratworks bipod and is a somewhat different design, but this is what is currently being used on modern production 24-inch barrels. More importantly, original bipods and airsoft copies are hard to find, so this will have to do for now. One additional note on the barrel is that the bipod's ability to swivel is limited by the screw that secures the yoke to the barrel. When the gun is set down and allowed
Where the fuck did I put my AC remote?
It applies torque to the barrel extensions that causes them to try to unscrew. So it was necessary to epoxy the barrel extensions to the barrel and then reinforce with a set screw.
Hang on
This barrel arrangement is thus permanent and cannot be disassembled. Moving back to the receiver, the optics have been slightly elevated by the addition of spacers as covered in our complete guide to the GHK AUG, link in the description. On top of the scope, a Simoon rail mount has been cut down to leave just the mount for an RMR clone. As an added bonus, some of the remaining hardware made for a perfect mounting point for a polycarbonate lens protector. In the receiver, only one change has been made to the bolt. After around 4,000 rounds of fire, it became apparent that the recoil springs were taking a set and starting to weaken. 1-inch long plastic spacers were added behind each spring, bumping the tension, and thus the variant was only adopted by the military of... So first, let's talk about
what did I miss?
While information in English-speaking sources is hard to find, Steyr appears to have developed their 24-inch H-bar barrel setup early in the AUG's history. This barrel was offered in two configurations. The first was a DMR using a ZF69 6x scope mounted to an export receiver with top rail, but otherwise was a standard AUG. The second was a light machine gun configuration, using either the standard A1 or later A2 receiver fitted with an open bolt trigger pack. The LMG was also intended to be used with 42-round magazines for slightly higher capacity. On paper, this LMG variant had a lot going for it. It was all drop-in parts, so had logistical commonality with the proven and reasonably successful AUG. It offered open bolt operation and quick change barrels, both of which are important characteristics for sustained fire, and with the bullpup configuration, even a 24-inch barrel length was relatively compact. However, on any gun where the sights are fixed to the receiver rather than the barrel, different barrels can produce different points of impact. And at a more fundamental level, the magazine-fed automatic rifle concept never saw much success in the West, with belt-fed machine guns dominating NATO procurement. Ultimately, it appears that no H-bar AUG configuration saw military success. The LMG variant was only adopted by the military of Luxembourg, and the DMR variant wasn't adopted by anyone. But Steyr offered the 24-inch
is that
barrel
like a
setup on
German?
the commercial market, and since barrels are fully interchangeable across the AUG variants, a variety of configurations can be found out in the wild today. So, our specifically replicates a light machine gun
Sorry, I'm springing out again,
configuration
fuck.
with an A2 receiver using a 24-inch barrel, open bolt trigger pack, and 42-round magazines. We've also made some tweaks that aren't specific to the LMG conversion, but we'll go through those as well. First up is the barrel group. This is at its core a Hephaestus steel 20-inch barrel with a Simoon steel gas block. GHK's pot metal gas block shears very easily, so this is good insurance against accidentally breaking off the foregrip. The inner barrel and hop setup are a drop-in TNT set, which has produced better results across a high round count than other test setups. At the front of the barrel, about 5 inches of airsoft barrel extension are used to bring up the length. It turns out that GHK molded part of what would be the barrel on the real thing into the flash hider, so it's necessary to add a bit of extra length to get it correct with a different flash hider. The flash hider here is an Angel Custom one, which, despite being Angel Custom, is actually a pretty nicely made steel replica of the correct H-bar flash hider.
Baru, Indomie kental manis durian Musang King.
Bikin semua mendadak durian.
Mendadak durian ini,
Mendadak durian itu. Semua bisa mendadak durian.
Indomie kental manis durian Musang King.
The bipod itself, however, is not correct to the originals. This is a Ratworks bipod and is a somewhat different design, but
Ratworks,
currently being used
German
for
works.
24-inch barrels. More importantly, original bipods and airsoft copies are hard to find, so this will have to do for now. One additional note on the barrel is that the bipod's ability to swivel is limited by the screw that secures the yoke to the barrel. When the gun is set down and allowed to rest on its side, this applies torque to the barrel extensions that causes them to try to unscrew. So it was necessary to epoxy the barrel extensions to the barrel and then reinforce with a set screw. This barrel arrangement is thus permanent and cannot be disassembled. Moving back to the receiver, the optics have been slightly elevated by the addition of spacers as covered in our complete guide to the GHK AUG, link in the description. On top of the scope, a Simoon rail mount has been cut down to leave just the mount for an RMR clone. As an added bonus, some of the remaining hardware made for a perfect mounting point for a polycarbonate lens protector. In the receiver, only one change has been made to the bolt. After around 4,000 rounds of fire, it became apparent that the recoil springs were taking a set and starting to weaken. 1-inch long plastic spacers were added behind each spring, bumping the tension and thus rate of fire back up to the correct 750 RPM. In the long run, it may be necessary to treat these as consumable and replace as needed. The fire control group represents the most significant change to the gun. Here we have the modified open bolt fire control group on the left and an unmodified GHK fire control group on the right. On the modified group, the catch surface on the hammer that interacts with the main sear has been removed, so the only thing that holds the hammer back is the auto sear. Whenever the bolt goes forward, it fires again. To make the bolt stay open, the function of the bolt catch has been essentially reversed. Instead of the magazine pushing the bolt catch up when empty, a new bolt catch is spring-loaded upwards. When the main
Spring-loaded.
sear moves back, this long lever arm pushes a bolt catch down, releasing the bolt. To be clear, for airsoft purposes, there's no functional advantage. The open bolt trigger pack and the stock one works just fine. On a real machine gun, open bolt maximizes airflow through the action and avoids the risk of cook-off that comes with leaving a round chambered in a hot barrel. But we made this conversion purely for the sake of accuracy to the real thing. Anyways, the last piece of the puzzle is the magazine. Standard GHK AUG magazines, styled after the real 30-round mags, hold a maximum of 40 BBs. To make this gun practical as an airsoft machine gun, we replicated the appearance of the 42-round magazine, but shortened the gas reservoir, tapped it for HPA, and incorporated a high-cap feed system from a Tokyo Marui mag. This hybrid magazine holds 450 to 500 rounds and will feed about half of them in a single wind. If you want to know more about how this magazine works, we actually have a video on it already, so I'll put a link in the description. Anyways, 5 of these magazines provides a total of 2250 to 2500 rounds, which is sufficient. So that leads into the obvious question, how does it perform? Well, better than I expected. With a fully loaded magazine, it's still under 10 pounds, but more importantly, it balances just ahead of the grip. This makes it very comfortable to manipulate and fire from the shoulder, manipulating much more like a rifle than a conventional machine gun. The optics suit this automatic rifle concept well. The scope is narrow, but with only a 2x magnification, the field of view isn't terrible, so it helps to walk fire onto hard targets without being slow to acquire or obscuring my peripheral vision. Then the red dot riding piggyback allows for fast acquisition at close range and a more heads-up shooting posture is needed. It's accurate enough with a TNT barrel setup for these optics to be genuinely helpful, and the issue of losing zero with someone online and everyone knows the gun with an overfolder for a SPAS 12, and the hybrid semi-auto and pump operation intended to allow optimal functionality with both buckshot and less lethal ammunition. The SPAS 12 doesn't have a lot of actual history to talk about. Franke designed it in the late 70s and began manufacture in 1979, seeing limited law enforcement and military sales as well as some importation into the US until 1994. It had no notable military users and no standout examples of combat use, but Hollywood seemed to just love the thing, and so a legend was born. I mentioned that the real SPAS 12 was both semi-auto and pump, and that's pretty much the entire point of the gun, as it is excessively bulky, heavy, and overcomplicated, all to achieve that feature. So it bothered me a little that the only widely available airsoft renditions were the Tokyo Marui and KTW Springers. There's also the Sheriff full bullet valve version, but that's an odd duck, and there are only a few dozen in the world. I wanted a proper semi-auto SPAS. So the concept was simple. Take the semi-auto Marzen M1100 system, at the time pretty much the only semi-auto airsoft shotgun and a shell ejector at that, and fit it to a Tokyo Marui SPAS 12 body. My original work was crude. I was in college and had minimal access to appropriate tools and made some decisions that would prove to be mistakes. So we're not going to talk too much about the original and instead focus on the revised version. Let's walk through the externals and then take it apart. The gun uses a standard Tokyo Marui barrel but an ASG SPAS 12 shroud. I should clarify that the externals are a mix of reused Marui parts from the original build and new donors from an ASG SPAS 12, but while there are some subtle differences, they're generally interchangeable. By default, the front bracket is completely blocked off, and the magazine tube extension screws onto the front, while on my original conversion I cast a duplicate of that front block in resin, which worked but didn't look great and started to crumble over time. This time around we used a drill press to incrementally bore out the front, which was a tedious process but ultimately worked out, allowing the Marzen tube to fit through. We then just epoxied some of the cosmetic parts from the Marui SPAS 12 tube to the Marzen tube, which limits how far it can screw in. Note that the barrel is also epoxied to this block, providing key structural support. Moving back to the pump, because this is now a semi-auto gun, the pump isn't needed for cycling. However, as with the original conversion, we installed an action arm that reaches back to the receiver, so pulling on the pump cycles the action. This time we also epoxied a small detent to the shroud concealed by the grip, which keeps the pump in place until sufficient force is applied. Ideally, we would like to replicate the authentic selection system of the real thing, which is this button on the bottom of the pump, but there didn't appear to be any good way to engineer it, so this will suffice for now. The receiver is ASG, and this secures to the shroud with the rear sight screw as on the original TM design. The receiver has been substantially modified, with the fake bolt cut out entirely.
Yeah, sorry, I'm speaking out again. Fuck, I'm so bored.
The screw serves as a cross pin to prevent the receiver from flexing outwards. The trigger guard has also been changed, with the cross bolt safety rendered non-functional by some internal adjustment, the lever safety locked in place, and the front cut off entirely to provide clearance for the carrier and tube. The pistol grip is a standard Tokyo Marui, modified on the back to accommodate the Marzen grip screw. The stock is actually KTW. The original version used a KTW grip mated to the Marui receiver, and that was a big mistake, requiring ugly reinforcement to hold it all. This solution is cleaner and much stronger. Note also that there's a macro line routed through the grip, because this gun has been converted for use with HPA. And then the whole thing, aside from furniture, was refinished with paint to get an appropriate look. That's it for externals, so let's take it apart and show a little more about how this actually goes together. First, we unscrew the magazine extension tube and remove the spring and follower. Next, we unscrew the front securing screw on the shroud and remove the barrel and front bracket. By removing the faux mode selection button on the pump, we expose the screws securing the pump to the action arms. Once those are removed, the pump can be pulled off the shroud, which reveals the detent mentioned earlier, which keeps the pump in place until sufficient pressure is applied. Now we move to the back of the gun. Taking out the grip screw and removing the HPA fitting allows the grip to come off the back. Removing the cross screw frees the trigger guard. And lastly, the charging handle comes off with one screw, which finally allows the Maruzen internals to slide out the back. So internally, this is a Maruzen M1100 system that's been converted for HPA, and the extractor has been drilled out and replaced with a screw cut to shape, but otherwise the internal workings of the gun are unchanged. Some modifications have been made to interface with the SPAS-12 parts, though. The SPAS-12 trigger has been pinned and epoxied in front of the actual trigger so that it can clear the rear end of the trigger guard when assembled. And a simple ABS rectangle has been epoxied to the internal gas block with a corresponding piece on the trigger guard, and this is what prevents the trigger guard from sliding forwards. So essentially, the trigger guard is held inside the receiver by the cross screw, kept from moving forwards by these blocks, and kept from moving backwards by the grip. Speaking of the grip, this has been internally routed for the HPA line and cleared as well to accommodate the Maruzen grip screw, which threads in the back. This secures the grip to the Maruzen internals. Then at the front, the magazine tube extension prevents the Maruzen internals from coming out the back, and the barrel indexes to the internals via two small tabs. All in all, the Maruzen internals are being pulled forwards by the magazine tube while also pulled backwards by the grip screw and then locked in place by the cross pin, and that keeps everything nicely solid. The only other thing to talk about internally is the pump mechanism, and that's just a simple linkage which is kept aligned by the pump grip. When the pump is actuated, the linkage pushes on the faux bolt to the Maruzen internals to cycle the gun. So, operation is simple. Hook it up to about 100 psi input, load 7 shells into the tube,
Baru Sutra 003, super tipis, serasa nggak pakai.
एक्सिस मैक्स लाइफ इंश्योरेंस के टर्म इंश्योरेंस प्लान्स दे रहे हैं आपको स्पेशल डिस्काउंट्स का भरोसा।
Click on the link below to buy now.
Welcome to Explosive Enterprises, and this is the APS CAM 870 Mark. In particular, this model appears to be based on a 20-inch Express Magnum with a slug barrel, which is a reasonably common hunting setup, but outfitted with an aftermarket Choate magazine extension. That's a bit of an odd combo, though we do have some evidence for it being a commercial configuration. Unfortunately, we don't have a real 870 in this exact configuration to compare against, but since my wife happens to collect combat shotguns, we do have a Remington 870 Police Wingmaster. So, let's start by reviewing the externals. Right off the bat, it's not hard to see the differences in finish when compared to the real shotgun. Even ignoring the different furniture and small parts, most of the APS parts are flat anodized black, a pretty typical finish for airsoft parts, while the real Remington parts have either gorgeous deep gloss bluing or greenish-gray parkerizing. If you're familiar with real shotguns, there's no mistaking the APS for one because that black anodizing is a dead giveaway that it isn't steel. Let's go through specifics. The CAM 870 barrel is nominally a 20-inch, but it actually measures about a quarter-inch short. The rifle sights are faithfully replicated and adjustable for elevation and windage, but the parts are fixed to the dovetail slots by concealed screws rather than being brazed in place. The barrel is cast alloy, as are pretty much all the externals, rather than steel as on the real thing. The finish isn't particularly durable, and it shows wear and handling marks quickly. The magazine tube, extension adapter, and stabilizing bracket are, as mentioned, patterned off a Choate extension kit. As you can see, they're all a little different from the Remington equivalents. Moving back, we have a wood forend in the classic Wingmaster style, and note that this is the original finish as it comes from APS. We believe this is birch, which on the real thing is used on the cheaper 870 Express line in lieu of the traditional walnut, but this raw blonde finish is atypical as usually the birch furniture is dyed darker. We did try stripping the stock to refinish it, but as you can see, even after cleaning with paint stripper, a new stain didn't take very well. The tube itself is aluminum, but the action bars are steel, and we'll be talking a lot more about those later. And the action bars pass through a pair of securing blocks, which are screwed into the receiver, in contrast to the real 870 where the tube is welded in. The receiver is again cast, with faint APS markings on the left side. On the right side, the bolt is visible. You may notice that the bolt itself is shaped a little differently, as it has this distinct flute that is not present on any factory Remington bolt. And then there are these ugly scrapes from handling, which demonstrate that the alloy and anodizing aren't a particularly tough combo. On the underside, the factory carrier is steel.
Alright. Again with the Milo. I don't want Milo, man. I don't like Milo.
Think it wasn't a fighting game.
Cyberbots Full Metal Madness.
Cyberbots is a 2D fighter that stands out with its mecha aesthetic and focus on air combat, as well as taking a massively different approach to the fighting game genre. A game where you fight with giant mechs? I could get behind that. I mean, I watched Pacific Rim, I thought it was cool. If you're not familiar with the game, I don't blame you. The game had limited distribution in arcades outside of Japan, and if you weren't about that pirate life, then Capcom Fighting Collection
This is
was
my
the most convenient way of
problem.
playing it nearly 3 decades after its release. The origins of Cyberbots is pretty interesting as well. The game is actually a spin-off of Armored Warriors, a beat-em-up where you pilot a giant mech and fight other giant mechs. Someone took a look at this game and thought, hey, let's make a fighting game out of this. And that's exactly what they did. By taking the mechs and slapping on a new coat of paint, Cyberbots was born. So let's boot this up, shall we? Right off the bat, you might recognize a certain character.
I like it.
This. I'm talking about Jin Saotome. That's right, your first experience with Cyberbots was most likely seeing Jin in Marvel vs. Capcom's 1 and 2. Should have been in Marvel 3, not gonna lie, but anyways, this is where he came from. But contrary to what you might think from seeing Jin fight, the well-designed characters you see here actually have no impact on the gameplay. The only difference between them is victory dialogue, and that you follow their own story as you progress through arcade mode. You know that giant arm that Jin would fight with in the crossovers? As it turns out, Jin and the rest of them are pilots, and it's the giant mechs that do the heavy lifting, which is to be expected with the mecha theme that's going on. So how about we get to the real stars of the show?
So you got a tank, big whoop, want to fight?
Bruh.
This arm belongs to the mech Bloodia, and is one of the 4 variant armors that you can choose from. This lineup comes straight from the mech selection in the original game. Additionally, each category comes with 2 custom-built versions of the base mech, so I should mention that in the original game, parts would occasionally drop from defeated enemies, and the player could pick these items up to replace existing parts of their mech to perform different moves. The 3 components you can replace are the arm, legs, and weapon. If you take this system and apply it twice to 40 in Cyberbots, for example, then you have the playable mechs Killer Bee and Tarantula. Notice how the base is the same for all 3, but the exchangeable pieces are all different. Think of it as how you would customize your vehicle in Mario Kart, but instead of vehicle parts, they're mecha parts. Now do this same process with the other 3 variant armors and you have a starting roster of 12 playable characters. There are only so many parts that you can randomly assign to the mechs before you start getting repeats, but thankfully Cyberbots took an effort to make the parts function differently. differently. Swordsman and Vice here share the same treads even though they're from different VAs, but Swordsman's tread attacks hit only one time while Vice's are multi-hitting. These small changes end up impacting the overall playstyles in a drastic way, allowing for a unique roster to emerge. Also joining them are 4 playable boss mechas that you fight one after the other as you near the end of arcade mode, and like the VAs, these mechs were taken from the original game, such as Helion, a near endgame boss, and Warlock, another boss that you encounter multiple times. And then
Warlock,
we have
that sounds
Gash,
like
who
a
is literally
D&D
just
game
a common grunt
character.
in Armor Warriors. I guess the dev team thought it was a more practical choice than the giant tank or a scorpion boss, but at least they managed to put in my favorite mech, otherwise known as Super 8. While she was merely the second boss in the original, Cyberboss takes full advantage of this uniquely designed mecha. This is among the best sprite work I've ever seen
Among
in a
Us.
fighting game, as there is just so much fluid movement going on in a lot of areas, and her animations are a goldmine for video editors like me. You see this spin attack? Nah, that's just a weed trimmer. The way their mid or jump looks? Seems like a graceful jellyfish to me. Oh, this axe that she brings out? Actually, she first used it when she traveled back to the past, saw Frieza running amok, and decided to cut his ass up. Okay, I'm having way too much fun. Point I'm trying to make is, Super 8 is a beautiful work of art in an already beautiful game. There's even little things here and there like all of the collateral damage in the background as you're knocking each other over in a match. It reminds you that, oh yeah, I'm using a weapon of mass destruction, of course it's not going to be neat and tidy. The bosses are playable by entering a combination of inputs as you select a regular mech, bringing the roster to 16, but there exists one more mech that was only available in certain versions of Cyberbots. This mech is none other than Z Goki. And as you might guess, he plays a lot like Akuma would if he was a giant robot. That's 17 absolute units altogether. Now would be a good time to explain how these mechs do all the damage they do.
Okay, Lois, you can open your eyes.
Bocce balls!
Let me show you how the gun works.
Bruh.
For this video, I'll be using the version used in CFC, which has some slight differences from others, but the core game plan stays intact. The game operates off of a 4-button system. There are 2 basic attacks that are officially known as Attack 1 and Attack 2,
Aichi Mama.
more commonly called light and heavy attacks respectively. Your light attack is your more quicker option, while heavies are slower but more damaging. And up close, pressing one of these buttons will grab your opponent. Your other type of offense is your weapon, which mostly utilizes these items I mentioned earlier. These attacks are usually a mech's way to play a full screen game, and are always some sort of projectile. Could be missiles, electric mines, you name it. Weapon attacks have a cooldown meter that's visible on the top of your life bar. Once a weapon attack is inputted, your meter goes down about halfway and you won't be able to perform this attack again until the meter fully refills. Some mechs like Super 8 don't have this visual aid, so learning the timing is key. Oddly enough, these attacks don't cause any chip damage. Projectiles not doing chip. How about that? You know what does chip damage though? The special attacks. These input combinations are all mecha specific and offer more utility, ranging from keep away options to combo extensions. The last form of offense comes through your power meter, which is gained by landing attacks on your opponent. Once this meter is full, you and your power bar starts flashing so crazy that I thought it'd be best to slow down this footage as to not give you guys, and myself, a seizure.
Oh, how do you watch that? It's like barfing rainbows in my eyes.
The power meter allows you to perform one of 2 attacks, the first being your Giga Crush. These are
Giga
generally
Crush.
used as a reversal to get an opponent off of you, while the bosses have used
Such
Giga
funny
Crush,
names for
the mechs who
moves.
share the same VAs have the same Giga Crush animation, but with minor differences in their gameplay properties. The second kind of attack is your Cyber EX and allows you to deal big damage if you
Cyber
hit.
EX,
I
is
should
that like
mention
Cyber
there is
Extreme?
another method to building meter, which is through the Universal Supercharge. This allows you to continuously build meter like if you were a Dragon Ball character. Just be careful since you can't attack in this state, and if you happen to get hit while charging, you lose an arm.
You mean like this?
Yeah, like that. Most of the mechs have an arm meter, and this behaves similar to the sun mechanic in Street Fighter. Taking enough damage in a short amount of time makes your arm fall off, and being attacked while supercharging has the same effect regardless of your arm health. In this state, any moves that utilize your arm can
the Blackstorm series of bullpup conversion kits for AK pattern rifles. Blackstorm have also developed an interesting standalone stock for the GP25 underbarrel grenade launcher called Defender. The GP25 is a 40mm grenade launcher designed in the late 1970s by the Small Arms Design Bureau at Tula. It's an underbarrel grenade launcher designed to slide onto standard AK rifles. Its ammunition uses a high-low pressure system, and it has a range of up to 400 meters. This video by the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Force demonstrates how the GP25 is normally mounted onto a rifle. The partial impetus for this is said to be that the Blackstorm rifle kits aren't able to support the grenade launcher so a standalone stock into which they could be mounted was developed. The most interesting feature of the Defender GP25 stock is that it has a recoil mitigation system. This appears to be a strong spring in the telescoping stock tube, which acts as a buffer. The stock kit is made up of a telescoping stock with butt pad, into which the grenade launcher is mounted, just as you would onto a rifle. A forward vertical grip can be attached by a pair of clamshell metal stampings, which allow the grip piece to be centered and held in place by two cross nuts. There's also a press-fit pistol grip extension for the GP25's short grip to help improve the weapon's ergonomics. Blackstorm lists the stock without the launcher as weighing 200 grams, while the Defender with the GP25 installed is listed as weighing 500 grams, or 1.1 pounds. Blackstorm sell the stock for 5,950 hryvnia, around $162. For some units transitioning to NATO caliber rifles like the M4A1, the MSBS Grot, FNFNC, and F2000 amongst others, the ability to use the existing GP25 as a standalone weapon has proven valuable, as the GP25 can't be mounted onto Western rifles, but with ammunition for the grenades still plentiful, they can continue to be used. The earliest imagery I could find of the Defender in the field dates to the 22nd of April 2022, when Russian reporter Wargonzo posted a short video showing a Defender captured by separatist DPR troops near Mariupol.
Удобно можно было работать. То бишь, если под ствол отстегнуть, там не защелкивается механизм, и он не будет без него работать. Ну просто как укороченный под ствол, так скажем. Это у азовцев поджали, да? Не, у меня свой. А это кому отдашь? Найдем кому-нибудь. Апату подарим. Да. Вот этот тебе? Спасибо, укропы, за подарок.
Most unique fighting game ever.
While it had a rich library of games, the family in the year 1998.
Hang on, be right back, guys. Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. Just checking what's going on. My nephew and his family came back from getting medicine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
One man by the name of Masahiro Onoguchi was on a quest to create an ambitious
Onoguchi.
fighting game. Who? All you need to know for now is that he worked on games like Tekken and Soul Edge as a motion designer, but not
Soul
just any
Edge.
kind of motion, 3D motion, ooh. I mean, it was the 90s. Game consoles were focused on 3D as it was all the rage back then. Your favorite game series were entering this realm,
Hang on.
and fighting games were no exception. So, what do you get when
Soul
you combine Genki, a game developer known for its racing games, and a guy who worked on these 3D fighters? You get Fighter's Destiny is a 3D fighting game that shines with its unique point scoring system, but it never really got much recognition due in large part to one thing. The game was only released on the Nintendo 64. While it had a rich library of games, the family-friendly system didn't mesh all that well with the fighting game genre. The PlayStation had gems like Tekken 3 and Marvel vs. Capcom, but the N64's fighting game market was dominated by Super Smash Bros. And if you weren't a fan of platform fighters, your only choices at this point were Killer Instinct, one of the many mediocre 3D fighters, or Mortal Kombat Trilogy, which was literally just a downgraded version of its PS1 counterpart, right down to the crunchy audio.
Scorpion wins.
What? I didn't play any wrong note.
Yeah, see, you're playing it like this.
Scorpion wins.
When ordinarily it goes like this.
Scorpion wins.
But enough of the game's history. How is the actual game? Well, on the surface, it doesn't look that great. Even with the upscaled graphics that I'm using, Fighter's Destiny has an awfully amateurish look, especially compared to 3D fighters that predated, and you can tell that while the game is in motion, it comes off as sluggish and stiff in a lot of areas. As far as the characters go, they're as generic as they come. Just look at poster boy Ryuji. If Identity Theft was a character, this would be it. Gameplay wise, he has an in-your-face aggressive playstyle, easily accessible as a quote-unquote main character should be. Over on the right, we have Leon, with his pretty boy face and generic.
Yeah, this is the first time I ever heard of Soul Edge. There's Soul Blade and then Soul. Okay, okay. Apparently they're the same.
While it had a rich library.
The scary world of 90s Sonic.
I remember one morning, I was sitting in the back of my dad's car, awaiting my grandmother, who had just landed in from Puerto Rico. We were parked near the JFK terminal, just waiting. I think we had to move because we were beginning to block some traffic. So we did, and a few moments later...
Sonic and real hedgehogs.
So Sonic has interacted with real hedgehogs a few times. In the 36th issue of Archie's Sonic X comic, the city of Station Square is running a pet show where the best
this one.
receive a collar studded with a Chaos Emerald. Eggman enters his minion Bokun, dressed as a cat, and Sonic, never one to avoid a challenge, has Chris enter him as a pet. While in line for registration, Sonic spies an actual hedgehog. This probably doesn't look anything like the hedgehogs you're familiar with, and that's because this is a European hedgehog. Sonic's equally confused, asking where its gloves and sneakers are. Then, Sonic Super Digest number 1 features a section where Professor Pickle and his assistant Cucumber talk all about hedgehogs. This section also featured new art of Sonic racing a real hedgehog, and one with Sonic, Silver, and Amy interacting with the hedgehog while Shadow, judging by his eyeline, stares at Amy. This section also makes reference to the concept of the hedgehog's dilemma, which is kind of funny when pairing it with art of Shadow acting aloof. So Sonic has interacted with real hedgehogs a few times. In the 36th issue of Archie...
I remember one morning, I was sitting in the back of my dad's car, awaiting my grandmother, who had just landed in from Puerto Rico.
Oh, a portable stove.
So guys, AK-12 version M1. This is the very first modernization of the AK-12. So finally, AK-12 M1. It was found in dugout on Russian position with stuck casing inside. So this is first hint. Anyway, it was collected. A very, very beautiful example of the first modernization of AK-12M. This sling, I believe, is also made from the AK-12 set. It's Magpul knockoff, okay? You have this first carabiner in front together
Carabiner. I need to remind myself that.
It does have this crossbolt saved after. You can unhook it and hook it on this part. That way you're creating 1 point sling. So basically it's like Magpul. On the rear it's secured with the QD mount. We will go from front to the back again. Thing that they left out on the M1 variant, that is after that, they make the muzzle device not removable, okay? Because here, unlike the traditional AK-74, it does not have a thread. It have just basically bayonet type of setup. So here is your muzzle, like so. Here is your modernized muzzle device. You put it on like so and just turn, and it secures. The benefit is that it's like much quicker. I guess you can get more debris before it becomes stuck, like on 74. After you need to take torch, heat it up and undo it. With this, the situation is probably a little bit better, but it really moves a lot, and I bet it causing a little bit more spread on your grouping. Here is bayonet lock, standard affair. Here is lock for your GP25 grenade launcher that you can attach. Then here we have removable plug on the gas block. We just press the latch, and with pressure the fit is relatively snug. We can remove it and we can clean from the front. So I think that's good stuff.
Good stuff.
It's a definitely good option. Did it worth the trouble of redesigning it? I'm not sure. We put the plug back. Okay, so generally the AK-74 type muzzle brakes are amazing, extremely effective. You will see in the footage. The sling loop moved to the front on the gas block itself. Then we have fixed gas tube. We can't remove this one. Then we have the plastic handguard. That for me it works really good. But if you, for example, put PEG 15s, the zero would not be that great on the lasers.
Wait, what's this?
Still, I think it will be manageable.
Surface stable fractal dithering. What's that?
I invented a new form of dithering. I call it surface stable fractal dithering. What's unique about it is that the dots in the dither patterns.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like something to do with cross-hatching. It's close enough. It's close enough. But it's on video games and 3D stuff.
What's special about that, and how does it work? That's what I'll dive into in this video. I'm Rune Skovbo Johansen, and this is Runevision. In 2018, Lucas Pope released the game Return of the Obra Dinn. Besides being an excellent detective game, the best I've ever played in fact, it also had a novel aesthetic where the world is rendered entirely in black and white using image dithering to convey shades of grey. But let's take a step back. Image dithering is a technique used in graphics to create the illusion of a higher number of shades than are actually used. For example, to use only black and white pixels to create the impression of many shades of grey. If you try to reduce a grayscale image to just black and white,
son of a bitch.
You have to choose a threshold where all pixels darker than this threshold become black and all pixels brighter than the threshold become white. No matter which threshold you choose, you end up losing most of the detail from the original image. But what if we choose a random threshold for every pixel in the image? This is equivalent to first adding random noise to the image and then using a uniform threshold like before, and we can do that easily in an image editor. Now granted, we do lose a lot of the finer detail here, but we're beginning to see the emergence of different shades of grey, even though we're only using black and white.
No.
And we can do a lot better than just using random noise. There are many different image dithering algorithms divided into a few overall methods. One method is called error diffusion. This method can produce the highest quality results for still images, but for moving images the dither patterns tend to change erratically every frame, which makes it not suitable for my purposes. Auto dithering is a different dithering method, where values in the original image are compared with values in a tiled threshold map. We can test that in an image editor by adding the tiled threshold map to our image and then applying a threshold. Here we're using a tiled threshold map known as an 8x8 Bayer matrix.
Bayer matrix. I need to search that.
Here we use a radial gradient, and the result is essentially halftone dithering, where we have big dots,
Yeah, it's close enough.
generally many times the size of a single pixel, with sizes that vary according to the brightness. When you use order dithering on a moving image, the result has a kind of pattern or texture to it which stems from the threshold map and which stays fixed on the screen. This can give a calmer appearance than error diffusion dithering, but the dots still move relative to the moving imagery, kind of sliding over it, which can still be a little bit distracting. Lucas Pope, who developed Return of the Obra Dinn, wrote multiple posts about his considerations for how to implement the dithering in the game. Obra Dinn uses an upscaled, low-res aesthetic which produces large, chunky dither patterns. As previously touched upon, order dithering is fixed with respect to the screen and is theoretically more stable than error diffusion dithering. However, when the camera rotates, so the geometry in the scene moves around in the camera's view, there's no connection between the geometry being rendered and the dither pattern that thresholds it. This produced conflicting visual cues as well as flickering, and playtesters found it unpleasant to look at. Lucas wanted to fix this by making the dither pattern be pinned to the geometry and to appear stable as it moves with the rest of the scene. In one of his attempts to achieve this, he tried to just map the dither patterns to the texel space of the scene geometry directly, but as he had expected, it didn't work well. The dither patterns would vary in size based on how close the geometry was to the camera, and also based on the specifics of their scale and UV mapping. While inconsistency of scale and UV mapping might be fixable with a lot of work, the issue with the variable distance to the camera was inherent and could not be worked around. Dither patterns just have to have a consistent scale in the screen in order to be effective. Lucas eventually came up with the idea to map the dither pattern to a sphere centered around the player's head. This way, the dither is pinned to the geometry during camera rotation, but not during camera translation. This was a compromise, but one he found quite acceptable and a good fit for the game. And I think it was a good choice. The game looks great, but it did plant a seed of an idea in my head. Would it be possible to somehow make a dither pattern that would be stable even under camera translation, yet have a consistent scale on the screen? I had a feeling it should be possible. 5 years later, I randomly decided one day to just try it out. I set up a simple test scene. For the dither pattern, I'm just using a radial gradient for a start. As we have seen earlier, this can be used for halftone dithering, but I'll wait a bit with the shading part and just focus on stable dots for now. The basic idea is this. We start with the approach of mapping a dither pattern to the texel space of the scene geometry. That is, to use the object's own UV mapping for the dither pattern. UV mapping, for those who don't know, is a common method in 3D graphics to encode in a 3D model how a 2D image should be mapped onto its surface. We can change the tiling frequency of the pattern, but it doesn't really help. As Lucas found, mapping the dither pattern to the geometry using UV mapping results in the pattern sometimes being scaled too small and sometimes too large. My core idea for how to fix this is to just compensate. Whenever the pattern becomes 2 times too large, we make it half the scale, and whenever it becomes 2 times too small, we make it twice the scale. We can do this because we can calculate the rate of change of the UV coordinates in the shader. We can round this rate of change to the nearest power of 2 value. This means we round it to a new value whenever the rate of change becomes twice as big or twice as small. We can modify UV coordinates that are divided by this value.
Alright, I'm back. Sorry about that. I had to take a whiz and
If we
get
map
water.
the dither pattern to these
Thirsty as fuck.
modified UV coordinates, we can see that it abruptly changes between different scales. But these different scales are all roughly the same size on the screen, varying only up to a factor of 2. The next step from here is to remove the abruptness between the different scales. Maybe you're wondering why we apply rounding to the rate of change in the first place. Why not just divide the modified UV coordinates with the rate of change directly? Well, when you scale a pattern continuously, the details in the pattern necessarily move around as a result. But we don't want them to move around, we want them to be pinned to the surface of the geometry, so we have to find another way. A way where you can keep zooming in on the pattern and it just keeps revealing more and more dots, kind of like in a fractal. Alright, we have to take a step back again and talk more about the type of ordered dithering that's based on a Bayer threshold map. The most basic form of Bayer threshold map is the 2x2 Bayer matrix. The 4 cells in the matrix represent increasing threshold values, and the order is important. Well, it's not important which one you choose as the first one, and in fact it's also not important which one you choose as the third and fourth ones, but the second one must be diagonally opposite the first, so if we connect the 4 points, they trace an X. With this threshold map of 4 cells, you can represent 5 different shades, corresponding to 0, 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of the thresholds being exceeded. But you can construct larger Bayer matrices too, that can represent a larger amount of different shades. The next common one is a 4x4 Bayer matrix, which has 16 cells and can thus represent 17 different shades. What's the order in this one? Well, you start with the same order from the 2x2 matrix, which traces an X, just spread out twice as much. Then you copy-paste that 3 more times. And the order in which
Wilfred Carey Stover likes my commission.
And you can use the
stream. Thank you, Wilfred. Really appreciate it.
8x8 Bayer matrix, which has 64 cells and thus can represent.
Hope you could stay a bit longer because this is almost done for this part. After this, I'm gonna like end the stream
tracing out the same old X. We can keep repeating this
and focus on other things right now. I might go out. Hang on, what time is it right now?
You see how the Bayer order dither pattern
11 past
already has fractal
10.
properties to begin with?
I don't know. We'll see.
Something we can work with. Let's go back to our work in progress. I'm going to start referring to the different scales as different fractal levels. The more you zoom in, the lower fractal levels you reach. We can see that one dot kind of splits into 4 smaller dots when it crosses the threshold to a lower fractal level, where the pattern is half the scale. If we just shift the radial gradient to be centered around the corner of the texture instead of the center, we can change the behavior so it appears like the big dot stays as one dot across the fractal level threshold. It just becomes smaller and is joined by additional small dots around it. This harkens back to the Bayer matrices, where we constructed a larger Bayer matrix by filling in additional cells in between the ones we had reused from a smaller Bayer matrix. Now, if we could make the 3 additional dots appear one by one instead of all at once, that would be even better. So far, we've had fractal levels where each lower level is half the scale, which means it has 4 times as many dots.
Wait, hang on. I don't like how this looks.
We now want to split each fractal level into multiple layers, where we can add 1 more dot in each layer. And of course, we use the ordering from the Bayer matrices to do it, tracing the familiar X. The dots in the lower fractal level are half as big. Well, the radius is. The area of each dot,
yeah, that looks good enough. Hang on.
And there are 4 times as many dots. We can generalize this across the layers by having the dot area inversely proportional to the number of dots.
Alright, I think that's about it for this session. Like for the rest is kind of like NSFW-ish. So yeah, I can't show that here. This is a Christian Facebook Minecraft server. and whatnot. So yeah, I'm gonna end this here. So yeah, so thanks to those who are watching this. I can't thank you enough. It's real nice having you guys here. So yeah, this is done for a while. I'm gonna continue the rest off stream, especially for the NSFW one. So yeah, catch you guys next time. See ya.